Welcome to the Learning Conversations, an Education Scotland podcast presented by Chief Executive Gillian Hamilton. In every episode, Gillian is joined by teachers, professionals and experts to unpack some of the big questions and topics facing the education sector in Scotland. Over to Gillian as she introduces today's guest.
I'm delighted to be joined today by Liam Stevenson and Jordan Daly, the co-founders and directors of TIE, Time for Inclusive Education. Welcome to the podcast, Liam and Jordan. I'm really delighted to have you here as guests and to talk more about inclusive education today. We've been blethering for about 15 minutes before this podcast started. We should probably have pressed record earlier, but I know there's a lot that we want to talk about and discuss today. So without further ado, I'm going to start our conversation. So welcome both.
Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, just for listeners who are not aware of the work of TIE, I'm just going to say just a tiny wee bit that TIE is a charity and it addresses prejudice and bullying of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender young people with education in Scotland's schools. You do amazing work. That's my summary of what TIE does. But would one of you want to kick us off by saying a wee bit more about the work of TIE and how you got here?
Yeah, so we, as you say, are an education charity. We're based in Scotland and we work with schools and education settings across all local authority areas. Our core purpose, really, is to address homophobic bullying and LGBT-related prejudice in school settings. And really the way that we try and do that is to support schools with what we call a proactive and preventative approach. So it's really about utilising education, ordinary teaching and learning to remove the stereotypes and the stigma that cause prejudice to arise in the first place. We are quite a small team, so we've got 6 staff overall, and there's 3 teachers who we're very fortunate work with us, and they deliver a number of services in schools. We run the National Delivering LGBT-inclusive Education professional learning course on behalf of the Scottish Government. We create curriculum resources, teaching materials to support schools with this work, and we also deliver education workshops for children and young people with quite clear differentiated learning to support them to develop their understanding of prejudice and really take that preventative approach.
And that's a small team.
Yes.
For you, it's probably one of the largest teams you've had, I'm guessing.
Yeah, So, do you want to maybe start with
how you got from 2 to 6?
Yeah, that was the thing. We thought we had a big team and we thought we were properly crewed up with 2 of us and realised that actually this ain't going to work. So yeah, going from being just a kind of a 2-person team and a campaign team to then upscaling and building your team up and having another number of people come in was quite a daunting process actually, because we'd never been employers before, never even been line managers before. But as Jordan says, we're really fortunate that right at the outset we were able to recruit teachers into these key roles, because it's absolutely imperative for us that we get experts working in the space with us. And from there we were able to kind of upsize the team again. We started off with 2 teachers. We were able to recruit a 3rd teacher, and fingers crossed, hopefully in the future, if and when we require to recruit more people to be our education officers, we are hopeful that we'll be able to continue down that pathway of recruiting teachers and education experts.
And you talked there about the importance of having teachers as part of the team. Jordan, you already talked about the creation of the professional learning programme and resources. I spend a lot of time in schools around Scotland and I've seen the impact of some of that work firsthand, both that it has on teachers who are engaging in the programme, but also the impact that it has on young people in our schools who can see a willingness and an openness from their teachers to learn, to make sure they get it right. And teachers tell me a lot that for them it's about getting it right. Can you say a wee bit more about the learning?
Yeah, so this is the really interesting part. So we'll probably in a wee second go into a wee bit of the backstory in terms of how we started TIE.
I'm going to come to the backstory.
I'm always so conscious. I think when people are introduced to the organisation for the first time, I think they maybe see a big national charity, and there is an interesting backstory. But the learning's the really interesting part for me. So we started our work in 2015. Fast forward a few years to 2018, and Scotland became the first country in the world to agree to have LGBT-inclusive education across the curriculum, and that started being implemented from 2021. So there was a 3-year development phase, and that included consultation and engagement with young people, with teachers. It was a multi-stakeholder effort. There were a number of organisations involved, including Education Scotland. And what's unique about the approach that we have in Scotland, so we have a national approach to LGBT-inclusive education, and that sets out some core principles that then help teachers develop and guide the learning and instruction that takes place in the classroom. And that national approach sets out that LGBT-related topics, so that might be past and present figures, that might be diverse families, anti-bullying, historic rights movements, they should be included across curriculum areas in a natural and integrated way. And that's really key, because what that means is it's about looking at ordinary teaching and learning. It's about looking at for a school starting their engagement with this work, looking at their existing curriculum and identifying those opportunities to include some of those themes. So, one of the best examples, and often the one that teachers will come up with straight away in the professional learning programme, is most schools will teach about World War II. A lot of schools might not be teaching about the contributions of Alan Turing. In doing that, this is someone who was voted the greatest Briton of all time, I believe in 2021. He's on our £50 note. I did laugh recently though and made a wee bit of a joke about how it was really nice of them to put the gay person on the one banknote that no one has. So we've got Alan Turing on our £50 note.
You not got a wallet of £50 notes, no?
Absolutely.
No.
I mean, I'm 29, so I
you
don't
won't
even
have any notes in your wallet at all.
Everything's on my phone. So we've got someone like Alan Turing who young people should know about, and his contribution not only to the war effort but also as one of the greatest mathematicians that we've seen should be taught about in schools. And he also has this kind of part of his story which is about how he was treated as a gay person post-war in Britain, and so that's often straight away quite a good starting point. So what that would look like in practice is, for example, there are opportunities in the history classroom looking at World War II. We can look at the horrors of the war, but we can also look at the introduction of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then we can look at rights breaches post the introduction of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by looking at the story of Alan Turing and looking at what happened to him. But there's also clever ways as well. Alan Turing was a mathematician, he was a code breaker, that's what he's known for. There are perfect opportunities in maths to be doing code breaking exercises and engaging and equipping young people with that maths routine learning, but they also get the chance to learn about a very significant gay historical figure. Some other examples, in primary schools, it's really actually quite simple. It's about diverse families. It's about supporting children to learn about and engage with the reality of the world around them. Same-sex adoption was legalised in 2007. There are children with same-sex parents all across schools in Scotland. They deserve and have a right to see their families represented in their learning. And that's really important. And it's also about looking at, we know that homophobic bullying and homophobia often arises from gender stereotypes at an early age. So ideas around, what boys and young men should do or shouldn't do, what girls and young women should do or shouldn't do. And so early kind of primary engagement is about looking at how we kind of address those gender stereotypes and really just let young people be themselves. There's loads of examples of what this is like in practice I could go into, but helpfully all of the teaching resources are public on lgbteducation.com.
That was a great plug there for people who are listening and want to learn more about the resources, to access resources. And I guess for me, the clue's in the title. What you were describing there, Jordan, is inclusive education. And that's in the title of all of the work that you both and the teams have been leading over a number of years. I want to come back just on that opening conversation to a number of points around, because you mentioned a number of kind of key, significant historical dates in there. But I want to take you back 10 years and to talk a wee bit. I said I would come back to about the founding of TIE. And I know we were catching up before we pressed record, as I said earlier. I'm sure, Liam, you've got a story about that founding of TIE. But do you want to tell us a wee bit about what brought you here?
Yeah, absolutely. We were. I was lucky enough to become. I say lucky enough. Some days I don't know that I was lucky meeting Jordan, to be frank. However, I was lucky enough to meet Jordan at the back end of 2014, and we became I think we'd call it fast friends. I think young folk would call it fast friends. We were very different individuals. I was a 36-year-old petrol tanker driver, heterosexual with a family. Jordan was a young 19-year-old gay student at the University of Glasgow. On the surface, we shouldn't really have anything in common at all. However, we had shared some kind of similar worldviews and some similar political opinions, and we clicked really, really quickly. And it was a strange friendship. I actually remember saying to my partner one evening, though, this wee guy's hit me like a train. I've never met anybody in my life that you've connected with and got on with so well so quickly. And what happened one evening, me and Jordan were having a chat about kind of growing up and being in school, and I can't remember what being in school was like at 36. It's a long way away, isn't it? And
I'm not going to comment on that.
I'm just
going to leave that one there.
Yeah, and at 46 it feels even further away, of course. And when Jordan told me about his experience at school and how difficult that had been, it was a real wake-up call. And when he described to me about how dangerous that phase in his life had been as well, it done a few things to me. The first thing it done was it made me upset. And being a big working class man for the west of Scotland, I had to go to the bathroom because I had something in my eye. So I went and got the something in my eye out and came back downstairs and spoke to Jordan about, a little bit more detail about how challenging, how difficult and how dangerous that period in his life had been. And at that point I immediately thought about my own daughter, who at that point was 3 years old. And I literally reflected his experience onto her if she happened to be an LGBT young person, and I asked myself a very simple question: is that okay for her? And of course that wasn't okay for Jordan, and it certainly isn't okay for my daughter either. So at that point we started having conversations about what would have made life different for you, and Jordan spoke extensively about school. And this whole period was a real awakening for me, because I was someone who didn't have any friends or any family at that point who were LGBT people, thought that things were different, thought things had changed since my time at school. And I thought things had changed. There was representation in media and film. So I was pretty shocked when Jordan spoke to me about his experience.
About the reality.
Yeah, and then I went and done a little bit of digging, and I pulled up some data from schools and young people, and it wasn't telling me any lies, that was clear. So having had extensive conversations, we decided that we were going to go and change Scottish education without any experience of campaigning, without any lobbying skills. We simply sat in my house in Cumbernauld and we said, right, okay, well, we need to go and change Scottish education to make sure that we look after and we protect young people who happen to be LGBT, and we protect them from some of the prejudice, and we protect them from the bullying that they may suffer within their times in schools, because it's simply not good enough for any young person to experience that, simply because of who they might be attracted to. And the campaign was born then and there in my wee 2-bedroom house in Cumbernauld.
And the education piece was really crucial for me personally, because as Liam says, we met 2014, and we
Jordan,
started...
can I just interrupt just for you? So you were 19 at that point and a student at university?
Yeah, so I was in my first year at Glasgow. Yeah. So 2014, 19. I feel like my hairline hadn't started receding yet at that point.
Oh no, I had. It was already receding. Don't worry,
that's nice to know. It definitely wasn't grey though. I get my hair cut recently, and I don't know why when they're cutting people's hair they give you the black thing, because I just sat there and watched all these grey hairs
to make it go black.
So let me take you back then. You're 19.
I'll go back to 19.
Rewind all those years.
Younger,
19.
fresher, no grey hairs, and first year at uni, and. I think probably my part of that story is, as Liam says, we met 2014, became fast unlikely friends. I was a year at uni at that point, and obviously a year out of school, I went straight there, and it was really, I think when I was around 17, 18, that I started learning for myself much more about other gay people like me. I always say now, I was the social subjects boy at school, so I loved history, I loved modern studies. Those were the subjects that I took all the way through to advanced higher. I went and done social science in my undergrad, and then equality and human rights in my masters. So that was just kind of my subject area. And when I learned about people like Alan Turing that we've spoken about, and when I learned about ACT UP, New York, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, when I learned about just this very rich, vibrant gay rights movement that I had never been aware of, names that I'd never heard, a history that I'd never heard. You know, I saw defiance, I saw people standing up for their rights. And that, when I'd left school, I remember just really, really lighting something in me around why didn't I learn about that at school? Because homophobia was so common in my school, and that started really early. I often will say nowadays, you know, I had a gay inclusive education when I went to primary school in the year 2000, which happened to be the year that Section 28 was repealed in Scotland, which of course banned the promotion of homosexuality in schools. That lasted 12 years. So in theory, I should have been, you know, the first generation of children to go to school post Section 28, where it would have been more possible to talk about gay people or gay relationships or gay history. So I did have a gay inclusive education in my primary school. It's just that it wasn't sensible, it wasn't formal, it wasn't led by an education professional. I heard the word gay almost every day in primary school. I heard the word lesbian frequently. I heard it in the context of slurs, jokes, insults, derogatory language. When I was a child, the word gay was akin to a bad word for me, because I heard people getting called gay, and I watched people getting defensive when they were called gay. I heard children, my peers, you know, describing things they didn't like as gay. Homework was gay, and your jacket was gay, and your shoes was gay, and that was so gay, and this was so gay. I heard that all the time. That was language that I was very familiar with. The problem is that there was nothing to counter that. There was no other education representation. So I didn't, as I say, right up until I was about, you know, P5, P6, the word gay for me was literally a bad word, and it carried connotations of shame and you know, humiliation, and it was used very much as an insult, and that's still common now. Primary schools, when they contact us, the number one thing they're looking for support with is how do we challenge homophobic language effectively with our children. It was, I think, kind of towards the end of P5, P6 that I started, I kind of knew by that point, gay means boys that fancy boys and girls that fancy girls. And that was when I realised that I actually think that's who I am. It started with the band Steps. Are you a Steps fan?
I'm too old to be a Steps fan.
Oh, yeah. I feel like everyone's a secret Steps fan, though. Is that just me?
Yeah, it's just you.
Jordan.
I feel like, see, on a night out, when it hits that kind of 1 a.m. point and tragedy comes on.
There's another generational divide. I'm never out at 1 a.m.
Well, again,
coming back to Steps.
Back to Steps. So, CD, I remember the Steps Gold, the greatest hits CD, right? And it's the one where they're all standing on the front cover and they've got like all the gold uniform things on. So my mum was a huge Steps fan, and she came home one night with the Steps Gold CD. We put it on in the hi-fi in the living room, and I remember lying on the rug in the living room, and I used to like flick. Remember, you get booklets and CDs, and it give you like song lyrics and stuff. So she had the CD on. I was lying in the living room. She's in the kitchen. I'm flicking through this booklet, and I stopped on this photo of Lee from Steps, and he looked like the most beautiful thing that I had ever seen. My heart skipped a beat. I get butterflies in my stomach. I got all flushed, and I knew what a crush was meant to feel like. So I think I just knew naturally that that was a crush. And that really, really, really stands out to me as quite a formative experience. But the reason it stands out isn't because it's just a, you know, innocent childhood crush. My little sister's 7. She's talking to me about all the, you know, people that she's got crushes on, and that's just part of development. But it stands out to me because that cute feeling was so fleeting. Because instantly there was this overwhelming sense of fear and panic, and the butterflies collapsed through a pit in my stomach because I felt intrinsically at that age that this was bad. That as a young boy, you're not allowed to fancy other boys, and you can't tell people about this, and this is bad, and this is wrong, and this is not okay. And I didn't tell people about it. I very much kept it to myself. And, you know, I think back to that, and I think back to that wee child, and I think about, like, where did that idea come from at that age, that being gay was inherently bad? And for me, it came from the language that I grew up around. It came from what I was hearing. It came from the context that the word gay was being used in, and the fact that it was never addressed or challenged. And that continued, throughout my time in school. As often happens when I went to secondary school, what started as language escalated into more serious bullying behaviours. As Liam's alluded to, things got quite serious for me in my first year of high school because of bullying behaviours. And I done well at school because I was so focused on getting to university, because I knew I wanted to go. I wanted to be the first in my family to go. And I had a lot of good memories from school, and I have, 2-3 friends that are still my best friends to this day. But a lot of my school experience is tarred by feelings of fear and panic and shame and worry because of the homophobia that I experienced, which unfortunately wasn't addressed by teachers and wasn't addressed effectively by the school. And when I think about, that 12-year-old boy who was experiencing homophobic bullying, really, really struggling to just be happy with part of who he was. I said earlier on that I was a social subjects kid. I remember learning about the civil rights movement in first year high school. Loved that topic, loved learning about that, because as a child who was experiencing bullying and felt like a bit of an outcast, when I learned about people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and the Freedom Riders, and I watched the clips from the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, I saw people who were standing up against discrimination, and I saw people that were advocating and fighting for rights and fairness and representation and justice. And that topic, I think, is probably what inspired that kind of arc of justice in me. But that period so stands out for me. And you know what I would have loved nothing more, because I genuinely think it would have changed my life at such a critical point, would have been to walk into that history class with the teacher that I loved, learning that topic I loved, and to be told about Bayard Rustin, the out gay civil rights leader, chief strategist of the civil rights movement, who organised the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, who was one of the Freedom Riders, such a key pivotal player in the US civil rights movement, and an openly gay man. If I had learned that, that would have revolutionised how I felt about myself. And that's the point of LGBT-inclusive education, is those natural moments of integration and learning.
And I'm really struck, that's a really powerful story you've shared with us this morning. I'm really struck by you sharing that experience of primary school, what it was like at secondary school, that took you to that conversation at 19, that took you, Liam, to be thinking, if that wasn't okay for Jordan, it wouldn't be okay for my wee girl. And that, for me, is, there's a light bulb for me. I've met you both before. I know a lot about the work of Ty, but just you both sharing those stories, a real righteous indignation that wasn't okay for you, Jordan, but it's not okay for any young person in Scotland. And actually, I might have something in my eye. I might need to nip up to the Education Scotland bathroom and come back. But if you weren't sharing those stories, the work of Ty might not be where it is today.
Yeah, absolutely wouldn't be where it is today. And I think that's one of the things we've learned. And we learned it very early on in the campaigning, because we didn't want to be front and centre. We thought we could just have a campaign, public awareness, and get what we wanted done. But we realised that the storytelling and the humanising of why this matters to us and why this matters to Scotland and why this matters to all Scotland's children and young people, I think, is so vitally important. And making it about actual human beings. It's not about a concept. It's not about any academic theories. It's about simply making sure people see themselves, their families, reflected in their learning. That's so simple, but everything that we learn from the work we do with schools and the feedback we get from schools, part of the effectiveness of the work that we with the national approach is the simplicity. Just shining that mirror up, holding that mirror up, and letting people see families like theirs, but also creating the window where people can look through the window and they're learning and see families not like theirs and get to understand that actually these are families the same as mine. They may be different in their composition, but they are a family bound by a love. They should be respected, and I don't have the right to not be respectful to them as they'll be to me. So it really is very, very simple. And something we look at is the James Banks model about additive. What is the James Banks theory called again?
So it's the Banks model for multicultural education. So it's the simple version is that it sets out kind of a multi-level approach to anti-prejudice education or anti-oppression education. And there's level one. In fact, it's helpful that you've brought that up, because it helps us, I think, probably crystallise a wee bit more, especially for teachers and practitioners that might be listening. Level one is what Banks calls a kind of contributions approach, and what that looks like is, we've got all these, the example of LGBT would be all these kind of cultural events. So we've got LGBT History Month in February, there's Pride Month in June, there's all these big days and months and, things that we do. The very basic level one approach would be, if I was a teacher wanting to take LGBT-inclusive education forward, I would say, okay, perfect, February's LGBT History Month, so for all 28 days of February, in the Regi class, we'll learn about a different LGBT person, we'll do 10 famous gay people PowerPoint in assemblies, and, we'll clap our hands and we'll put rainbow flags up all over the school, and that's it, done. That's not the approach. Uh-huh. It's not the most effective approach. It's, as you go back to what you said earlier, the clues in the name around the LGBT-inclusive education. The education's there, it should just be inclusive of LGBT people and topics. So this kind of whole celebratory, really big whole school events thing isn't what the national approach is, because that can go wrong sometimes too. I will often say that when I was being bullied at school, the worst thing my school could have done would have been to just suddenly put rainbow flags up all over the place, because it would have shone a spotlight on those of us who were being bullied just because people thought that we were gay. I wouldn't have went into school for it. So for a school starting this work, they want to be at kind of Banks level 2 and level 3, which is level 2 is an additive approach, which is what I set out earlier on. You look at your existing curriculum, you add opportunities for natural representation. Level 3 is called the transformative approach, and that's when you sit down and do your curriculum planning, your curriculum making, that you're building your curriculum with this integrated from the outset. So we really advocate for that level 2 and level 3. But you were, I think, were you going?
No, I wasn't going anywhere. I was just going to kind of touch on. No, I was going somewhere. And what we now see is, and it's for us, it's a really pleasing thing, because as people who are not originally education experts or educators, the vision that we built with the multi-stakeholder group and stuff, we now see that coming to fruition. And we always wanted LGBT inclusive education to be multifaceted and interact with different people in different ways. And it does, because the feedback and the data we get from schools shows us that those children and young people who happen to have two mummies or two daddies, the schools are telling us at the primary level that those children are much more confident and much more inclined to talk about their families than they had been prior to the schools starting to implement LGBT inclusive education effectively. When we look at the secondary school, we then have people who are LGBT young people who see those figures, some of them, like Jordan speaking about, Alan Turing, Bayer Bruston, Sally Ride. Some of these young people see people who are a little bit like them represented, and these people have achieved remarkable things, and they get something from that. But what we also know through the work we're doing is that when we introduce these people and these figures and these events to young people who are not LGBT, we start to build empathy and understanding. And that's a remarkable thing, that we can do these three things to three different demographics, and we can do it really successfully. And we're currently working with the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and actually the researcher's due back over next week for his final visit. So he's been researching this for about 3 years now, I think, 2 years, 3 years. 2 years, yeah. He's watched everything that we do, he's looked at all the resources, he's observed teacher training, he's observed workshops, he's observed the assemblies, the year group assemblies that me and Jordan do, and he's going to be publishing 3 papers very soon. And actually, he's shown a child's developmental lens over the work, and that's how he's measured how LGBT inclusive education is landing. And his early conclusion, and I think it's going to be his final conclusion, is that we fail children if they don't have an LGBT-inclusive education, because there's key developmental targets or points that we can't hit, and most of them are all about understanding about other people, empathy, compassion. So we're managing to do a lot of different things at the same time to different wee groups of people. And one of the things that we've been doing a lot recently is we've been working in football. So we've been working with demographics in schools that we probably would be regarded a little bit harder to reach when it comes to talking about LGBT people. So we're using the medium of football, and we've been working with Scotland's only ever openly gay male footballer, Xander Murray, to go and deliver workshops with these groups of young people, and they're proving to be really effective as well, because what we're doing, we're taking the national obsession with football, we're, again, additive, we're adding an element of actually there are gay players and there are gay fans, and this is why we need to think about how we're behaving, how we're interacting with people, and those workshops literally all come down to, people can change the language, and the language change the culture, and the culture will then change the environment in which young people are learning and trying to grow. So I couldn't be happier with how well this work is landing in schools in Scotland right now when it's done effectively and when it's done in line with the national approach. It is landing extremely well, and it's something that we don't really do Pride very much well. We do go to Pride marches, of course, but me and Jordan are really terrible at reflecting, because we're always looking ahead, we're always thinking, what do we need to achieve next? But when we do take those brief moments of reflection and we see some of this data coming in and some of the analysis that academics are doing, it does give us a real sense of pride, because what we know already is that there are children and young people in Scotland schools and going through the education system who are having a different experience for Jordans, and they're having a better experience, and a lot of these young people have a lot in common with Jordan. And if we can go and do that, I often used to say that if we'd done that for one child in all of Scotland, the Thai campaign was a success. But we've got an opportunity to continue to do that for generation upon generation of young people, and that's something that I don't think just myself and Jordan and our team at Thai should be proud of. I think the whole Scottish education system should be really proud of that. I
think you're spot on. I was going to say exactly that. I was thinking of the Robert Burns quote, the gift to see yourself as others see us, and actually having an academic from across the pond. Now there's a whole other conversation that we might come back to, but having an academic look at a different lens, look at this work through a different lens, to be making those kind of statements, publishing about the work, that's amazing. And you've both talked a number of times about the national approach. The Scottish Government have been committed to this work for a whole number of years. I'm really proud to be part of an education system that prioritises this work. And you talked there about, from the outset, you thinking, if we make a difference to one young person, but my goodness, you've made a difference to a whole lot more than one person. And you've made a significant difference to an education workforce who support these young people. And we've talked about that work a few times. I'm reflecting as you're both talking about one of the key pieces for teachers in this space is about confidence, about knowing what to teach, how to approach. I was struck, Jordan, when you were saying about one of the most common questions from primary schools is about how to deal with homophobic language. So actually giving, through this work, teachers the confidence to support young people as best they can. Who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, and that's... in some ways, as Liam says, we don't do a lot of reflection. I think that's possibly also maybe it's just an us thing, but
it's a Scottish thing as well,
I think it's possibly a Scottish thing.
Let's not get too careless.
Let's not boast too much.
We've been we're always kind of pushed to be humble. But when I do that reflection piece, exactly what you've said there. We've got quite a large historical context with LGBT-inclusive education in Scotland, and it starts with Section 28 in 1988, repealed in 2000, and then we kind of had like a bit of a lull. The Scottish government in 2007 released, I think it was called like the Hearts and Minds Project or something, which was like an anti-homophobia toolkit. There wasn't loads of uptake on that, but there wasn't like a national coordinated policy or programme. And when we started our work, we felt it was really important to engage with the teaching profession. One, because at that point we didn't have expertise in education, but also because we see it socially and culturally, right? Everyone thinks that the solution to everything is education. And this occasion, we also thought that the solution was education. However, what we felt at that point was very important, and we still have this spirit in the organisation today, is you can't just expect teachers to come up with a solution to all of society's problems. You have to provide them with the tools and the knowledge. So it's one thing to say, this maybe isn't working so great, and here's a suggestion for how it can be changed. You have to back that up with solutions and resources and tools. So where we are now, if we reflect, is when we started our work, the number one thing that would come out was teachers would say, we're not confident and we're not 100% sure how to approach this. We had different training courses that organisations ran, but they cost schools money. There were resources that were often behind a paywall. There's another whole conversation will be the education industry in terms of the money that schools are expected to sometimes pay for things. We wanted to make sure that everything that we were producing or that would become available eventually was freely provided. And now, in 2025, we've got a national two-stage professional learning programme provided by Scottish Government, programme endorsed by Education Scotland, that's provided free to all teachers and school staff in Scotland. Even that alone is really significant. There's no other,
that alone makes us a world leader, that in itself, with all the other stuff we do.
That's huge, and it's that kind of leadership piece, and that was developed to give teachers the confidence, and it's a great course, and it's always really well evaluated. But we also have teaching resources, we have national guidance in LGBT-inclusive education, so we have actually come a long way. And in some ways, the kind of hard part, the policy development, the framework, a lot of the nuance of what this looks like in practice has been done and has been established. And now I think it's really just about increasing engagement and supporting staff and kind of knowledge raising really that all of this is available.
But I think there's another aspect to why our work works, and it's because right from the outset we've always been, as Jordan says, obsessed with solutions. We launched the TIE campaign from my bank account in 2015, and we went from 2015 to 2021 doing all that work in our spare time. And that wasn't just the lobbying and the policy influence and the policy making. We were also doing teacher training events, and we were also doing assemblies up and down the country to groups of young people. And I sometimes reflect, now we'll only ask our staff to do a maximum of 4 workshops in a school in a day. That would be the most we'd ask them to do, because it's difficult, it's hard going. Me and him used to go and do 6 year groups back-to-back assemblies in a day, and our day off work and his day off university. It was horrendous. So we were always really focused on what are the solutions and how do we find the solutions. And for us, what was key to that was working really closely with the people with boots on the ground, the professional teachers that are working in classrooms and schools every single day. What do you need? Tell us what you need. And also, allied to that, working closely with the teaching unions. When you can pull all these people together and you take it away from the fancy offices where the decisions are made, and you pull these people in, that's how you can always go and get an approach that's going to work. And I don't just say that as someone who was a trade union rep, as a petrol tanker driver, but making sure these people that are doing the work on the ground are in the room when the decisions are made was fundamental for us. And we've done that from the very beginning, and we'll continue to do that right until the end.
And that partnership approach, working closely with professional associations, Education Scotland, academics, it also builds an advocacy approach. We joked earlier about the two of you starting this from your bedroom, clearly because you're passionate, you know the importance of the work. That's not sustainable. I don't need to tell you that. You realised it yourself as you grew the organisation. But a part of the success, I think, of the approach you've taken is that you've built advocates of the work as you've grown it across the profession.
Absolutely.
I'm really conscious of time, but there's 2 things that I do want to talk about before we draw our conversation to a close. And I heads up, Jordan, the second one that I'm going to come back to is, what would it be like for Jordan starting school now? Okay. That's going to be my final question.
Right.
You're all going to have something, Brian, in a minute.
I know.
But I can't let us have this conversation without taking cognizance of the kind of world stage just now. Clearly, through this conversation, you're not saying we'll get to a point when our work here is done. But there's a sense for me in our conversation this morning that this work has always been important, but we might be about to enter a chapter when that importance is going to be magnified again because of wider world events. Is that something that you're both worried about?
Yeah, and I think probably the irony and actually probably the reality of the situation is that Liam and I, this year's our 10-year anniversary for when we started TIE. And, you know, we've made a couple of jokes about, like, I basically lost all of my 20s to campaigning and education. And we used to, Liam was a night shift worker, so I used to finish my work and then sit in my car with headphones in because my wee sister had just been born, and we would be like, I'd be like typing all of our like recommendations up while at 3 a.m. in the car while Liam was out driving his truck. And so I was hands-free by the way. Hands-free, yeah, for clarity. So there's been a lot of time on this, and I think we kind of naturally got to a point maybe last year where it felt like just naturally that the two of us were kind of like, where are we going here? And then the cultural climate kicked in really in the way that it did, and it became clear to us that actually no, you're right, this is much more important perhaps than it's ever been. It's always been important, but in many ways education, I think, at this period becomes actually quite a critical defence. And we're seeing, we're seeing a lot of things play out that could probably be a whole other podcast episode. But in essence, what we're seeing, I believe personally, are quite critical threats to democratic values, democratic institutions, third sector organisations that support and contribute to Scottish society, but fundamentally also attacks again on minority groups and communities. And we're seeing prejudice manifest really differently. And we're also going through a bit of a kind of technocratic, digitised social media and just disinformation epidemic at the moment. And that has consequences. And we've seen that in schools. We've seen it in schools, in the last year. And that's why actually a kind of new phase of our work has been really focusing on where we are currently. We launched the Digital Discourse Initiative, which is a new tool and resource, again, freely provided for schools in Scotland. It's quite a leading resource, actually, and we collaborated with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in Germany on that, and really kind of combined our expertise as in anti-prejudice education, their expertise as counter-extremism strategies. So both organisations really kind of quite well blended our expertise and managed to create a new resource for teachers, which is really all about bringing them up to speed on disinformation, how prejudice manifests online, but quite critically, how children and young people are exposed to that and how schools can effectively respond. A really alarming stat that I actually think, puts everything we've spoken about in context is that Ofcom data published in 2023, looking at children and young people and their parents' attitudes and engagement with media, found that a quarter of 5 to 7 year olds have a TikTok account. That stands out to me because that's my little sister's age. Yeah. And I can't imagine anything worse than her being on TikTok, for the reason being that ISD's research a few years ago was a deep dive into hate and extremism on TikTok. And the conclusions were appalling. Very significant amounts of extreme misogyny, extreme homophobia, racism, white supremacy. And in the 2024, we held focus groups with over 200 secondary school pupils, and they told us what they were seeing online, and it was even more extreme than I would have imagined, from my time at school. So the culture has changed, the climate has changed. We now see it, as our job to really enhance and protect and further what we've managed to build in Scotland, but also make sure that there's adaptability there, because the way that prejudice and hate is manifested nowadays is different.
And I know we joked about we could have a second cut, but I think that would be a really good area to explore in a future podcast, and maybe invite a couple of other partners, because I think that, as you say, that is changing, and we need to work together to look at how we support our young people in that space. Definitely,
but see, just on the current climate and with the foot race in some places to abandon approaches towards equality, diversity and inclusion, that's something that is a real concern, because we know that doesn't stop at borders, it doesn't stop at oceans. that's something that is able to be, to be blown across the ocean quite quickly and quite effectively, devastatingly so in some cases. And there's two people I think about it that's related to the work that we do, and one's Sally Ride, who says you can't be what you can't see, and that's so true. So when we end up in a situation where we try and, when people want to turn their backs on equality, diversity and inclusion initiatives in public life and in employment, we end in a set of circumstances where we go back in time and people start to hide parts of who they are. That then makes me think about Bayard Rustin. And Bayard Rustin, when he speaks about, and this is another quote of his, he speaks about the fact that he was never secretive about the fact that he was a gay person, because he said that if he kept that part of himself from the world, he would be aiding and abetting prejudice. If that's a pathway we find ourselves on, we all are very quickly in a very dark place. And for me, and I know it's again another cliche, that societies should be judged on how they treat their most vulnerable people. If we find ourselves in that sort of circumstance, it's certainly not a society that I want to have any part in, because we must continue to make sure that we're providing opportunities and we're holding people up from minority groups and celebrating them and making sure that there's spaces for them in every aspect of our lives.
And not take for granted that all of the work that has taken place so far is enough of a buffer.
Yeah, because it's clearly not settled. It's clearly not settled.
I'm going to come back to my last question.
Yes.
And we didn't give you any others in advance, but we gave you that one in advance. For both of you, what would it be like now for Jordan starting school? And you can choose primary or secondary.
So, I think it would have been significantly different if I had gone to a primary school where one of our staff members had come in and done our challenging homophobic language workshop. We see the outcome of that work, and we see in the UCLA workhouse schools report that the use of things like That's So Gay almost changes overnight because it's been spoken about sensibly and addressed efficiently with the children. If that had stopped at my kind of quite formative point around P5, P6, and then I had gone up into a secondary school where, I'll just go back to what I said, where I did learn about Bayard Rustin, I'm not naive enough to think that the bullying might have stopped overnight. But if I had been part of a generation that had this preventative, proactive educational approach from primary all the way up, we would have gone into secondary school knowing that homophobia wasn't okay, it wasn't acceptable, it wasn't tolerated, and it's very likely that I wouldn't have had the experiences that I had. Even if I did, learning about Bayard Rustin at that age would have been what I really needed. And what it would have done for me is it would have gave me confidence to know that there were other people like me. It would have given me a role model, it would have given me someone to look up to, and it would have kick-started a process of self-acceptance, I think, a lot earlier than it took. And I read a quote, actually, and this is probably where I will get emotional, because I was looking at our evaluation data, and there was a anonymous quote, because the young people can kind of provide feedback on the sessions, and it was very simple. And it was from S1 pupil, which was the age I was. So it's that kind of 12-year-old, always really difficult for me. Everything I do, I always think about what would 12-year-old Jordan think of this. And they had simply said, I have never heard a gay person speak with confidence like this before. It's amazing because I think I am gay too. And I think like that, see just hearing that, I know how that young person feels, and so yeah, it would have been revolutionary, and I know that for that young person that would have been revolutionary. Sorry, it's happy tears. We're not.
I know, but my goodness, to know because often in all of our jobs, you do work that you don't see the impact of. Yeah, you hope that it makes a difference, but to hear it directly from a young person who said that. It's just a reminder of how important this work is and how different it might have been. Yeah. Sure. I'm going to draw this conversation to a close on those happy tears.
Happy tears, not sad tears.
I think the sign of a really good podcast recording is that you forget there are mics in the room. And I don't know about you two, but I forgot there were mics in this room about 40 minutes ago. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for your honesty, for the power of the stories that you've told, and probably even more importantly, for the really important work that you're both leading with others across Scottish education. So thank you for joining me today. I'm not going to let you off because we've already talked about coming back for another conversation, but thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe for notification of when a new episode is published. If there is a topic you would like to hear featured on this podcast, get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. Follow us on our social media channels for all the latest news from Education Scotland. Education Scotland is a Scottish Government executive agency charged with supporting quality and improvement in Scottish education.